Teisha with Shalom TV's news update for Monday, May the 20th, 2013. The Conference on Jewish Material Claims Against Germany has now appointed a committee to, quote, formulate an appropriate course of action, unquote, regarding allegations that officials at the conference were alerted to a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme years before any action was taken. As we reported to you last week, a letter alerting conference officials to the fraud was received back in 2001, alleging that conference official Semen Domnitzer, along with others, was approving false claims for restitution. However, Domnitzer denied any wrongdoing and the matter was not investigated any further, and the fraud continued. Domnitzer was found guilty 2 weeks ago of spearheading the fraud, and after information about this letter came out during his trial, there are questions now of why the matter was not investigated further at the time and allegations of a possible cover-up. Yesterday, Claims Conference Chairman Julius Berman wrote in an email that he has asked Claims Conference Chairman of the Executive Ambassador Ruvain Merchav to head a select leadership committee of the board to formulate an appropriate course of action for the conference with respect to the issues surrounding the 2001 letter, adding that he looks forward to its deliberations and recommendation. This follows an earlier announcement by the World Jewish Congress that it was setting up its own task force to look into the allegations as well. A delegation from UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, will not be allowed to visit and inspect Jerusalem's Old City as planned this week. Israel had said last month that it would allow the UNESCO visit as part of an agreement with the Palestinians. Israel had severed ties with UNESCO back in 2011 following its recognition of a Palestinian state. And this week's visit was thought to be a sign of a possible renewal. But an Israeli Foreign Ministry spokesman said today that the delegation had been postponed because the Palestinians had politicized the visit. He said the Palestinians violated all the agreements Israel had made with UNESCO, that the visit was to be a purely professional one and not a political one. He said the Palestinians asked to introduce a slew of political elements into the visit, with PA Foreign Minister Riyad al-Malki characterizing the visit as a fact-finding commission to investigate Israeli steps in Jerusalem. The Israel Foreign Ministry spokesman said that he hoped the delegation is postponed and not canceled. An ultra-Orthodox radio station in Israel that up until now has not allowed women to call in and speak on the air will have 6 months to change that policy and not only allow female callers to be heard, but also have to hire a female broadcaster. This is just one of the recommendations of a report issued by Israel's Justice Ministry last week to end gender segregation in the country. Israel's Attorney General Yehuda Weinstein said he would adopt the recommendations and said those public agencies who don't implement them will face criminal prosecution. IRAC, the Israel Religious Action Center, has been fighting gender segregation in Israel for years, and last week's report accepted nearly all of their recommendations to do so. IRAC Executive Director Anat Hoffman praised the report, whose recommendations relate to gender segregations in various areas of Israeli public life, including public transportation and other public services, like the one offered by Radio Kol Barama, a station with a large ultra-Orthodox following, which up until now has not allowed women to speak on the air, having men read the questions that the women fax in. IRAC has been fighting for years against the station's exclusion of women, and last week's report addresses the station directly, instructing that within 6 months the Kol Barama radio station should end its exclusion of women and enable women's voices to be heard without restriction, and that the station should also employ women broadcasters. The Attorney General forwarded the report to various ministers in the Israeli government requesting their comments before publishing operational guidelines for the report's implementation. And finally, today, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry released the International Religious Freedom Report for 2012 today, which points to a continued global increase in anti-Semitism. It also states that, quote, Holocaust denial and glorification remained troubling themes, and opposition to Israeli policy at times was used to promote or justify blatant anti-Semitism, unquote. According to the report, the greatest concern stems from the anti-Semitic statements by government officials, religious leaders, and the media, especially in Venezuela, Egypt, and Iran. But the report also noted a similar phenomenon growing in France and Hungary. Kerry Today also named Ira Foreman, who led President Obama's re-election campaign in the Jewish community, as the State Department's new special envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism. The Anti-Defamation League welcomed Foreman's appointment, saying it demonstrates that America's resolve to fight anti-Semitism is serious and ongoing. And that's Shalom TV's news update for Monday, May the 20th, 2013. I'm Teisha Vader.